Our first story takes place in a small, obscure museum known for its eclectic collection of artifacts from around the world. The museum had recently acquired a new exhibit, a set of ancient relics believed to have been cursed by the civilization that created them. The curator, eager to draw in more visitors, prominently displayed the relics, unaware of the darkness they would bring. One evening, after the museum had closed, a security guard named Alex was making his rounds. He had heard the rumors about the cursed exhibit, whispers of strange occurrences and unsettling feelings, but he dismissed them as just scary Reddit stories meant to spook the new guy. As he walked through the dimly lit halls, the horror ambience was immediate. The air was heavy with a sense of unease, and the shadows seemed to stretch and shift in the corners of his vision. As Alex approached the exhibit, the temperature dropped, sending a chill down his spine. The relics were arranged in a glass case, their dark, twisted forms casting eerie shadows on the walls. As he stared at them, he felt a strange pull, as if the relics were drawing him closer. The horror ambient grew thicker, the silence pressing in on him like a weight. Suddenly the lights flickered, and a deep, resonant hum filled the room. The relics began to vibrate within their case, and Alex's heart raced as he realized he couldn't move. He was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by a force he couldn't see. The hum grew louder, more intense, and the relics seemed to glow with an unnatural light. Then, without warning, the glass case shattered, sending shards flying through the air. The relics clattered to the floor, and as they did, a shadowy figure emerged from the darkness. A twisted, ghostly form with hollow eyes and a mouth that gaped in a silent scream. The figure moved toward Alex, its movements jerky and unnatural, like something out of a Batman analog horror film. Alex tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure reached out to him, its cold, clammy hands closing around his throat. The last thing he saw before the darkness consumed him was the relics, now glowing with a malevolent light, as if feeding off his fear. The next morning, the museum staff found the exhibit in ruins. The relics scattered across the floor, but Alex was nowhere to be found. The security footage showed nothing but static, and the cameras had all gone dark at the exact moment the incident occurred. The museum quickly closed the exhibit, but the relics were never returned to their display case. Instead, they were locked away, buried deep within the museum's archives, where they remain to this day. Our second story takes place in a grand historic museum known for its vast collection of art and sculptures. The museum had stood for centuries, its walls adorned with masterpieces from every era, but there was one gallery that was rarely visited. A small, secluded room at the end of a long, winding corridor. The room housed a single painting, a portrait of a woman with cold, piercing eyes that seemed to follow you wherever you went. The painting had a dark history. It was said that the artist had been driven mad while creating it, and that the woman in the portrait was not just a model, but a spirit that had attached itself to the canvas. The painting had been in the museum for years, but it was rarely shown to the public, as those who had seen it often spoke of strange occurrences, whispers in the dark, fleeting shadows, and a growing sense of dread. One night, a museum curator named Emily was working late, cataloging the new acquisitions. She had always been fascinated by the paranormal and had read countless scary Reddit stories about haunted objects. Curious about the painting, she decided to visit the gallery despite the warnings from her colleagues. As she entered the gallery, the horror ambient was immediate. The air was thick with a sense of foreboding, and the only sound was the soft echo of her footsteps on the marble floor. The painting hung at the far end of the room, its subject's eyes seeming to lock onto Emily as she approached. The closer she got, the more intense the feeling of being watched became, as if the woman in the painting was aware of her presence. Emily stood before the painting, staring into the woman's cold eyes. The horror ambience grew thicker, the air heavy with an oppressive weight. Suddenly she felt a chill run down her spine as a cold breeze swept through the room, though the windows were all sealed. She turned to leave, but the door slammed shut with a deafening bang, trapping her inside. Panic set in as the lights flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Emily's heart raced as she heard a faint whisper, a voice low and malevolent, speaking in a language she didn't understand. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and the woman in the painting seemed to move, her eyes narrowing as if in anger. Emily tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. The room grew colder, and she could see her breath in the air. The whispers turned into a chorus of voices, all speaking at once, filling the room with a cacophony of sound. The painting began to glow with an unnatural light, and Emily felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to look into the woman's eyes. As she did, she felt a force pulling her toward the painting, her body moving against her will. The woman's eyes seemed to bore into her soul, and Emily's vision began to blur. The last thing she saw before the darkness consumed her was the woman's mouth twisting into a cruel smile. The next morning, the museum staff found the gallery empty, the painting still hanging on the wall, but Emily was gone. The security footage showed her entering the room, but nothing more. She had simply vanished. The painting was removed from the gallery and placed in storage, but the room remained closed, a place where no one dares to enter. Our final story takes place in a sprawling natural history museum, known for its vast collection of fossils, taxidermy, and ancient artifacts. The museum was a favorite among visitors, especially children who marveled at the towering dinosaur skeletons and lifelike animal dioramas. But there was one exhibit that was off-limits to the public, a storage room deep within the museum's labyrinthine corridors, where the most unusual and unexplainable artifacts were kept. One night, a group of paranormal investigators known for their podcast Horror and Ghost Adventures were granted special permission to spend the night in the museum. Among them was Chris, a skeptic who had never believed in the supernatural, but who was fascinated by the idea of debunking the myths surrounding the museum's haunted reputation. As the group set up their equipment in the main hall, the horror ambience was immediate. The air was thick with a sense of anticipation, and the exhibits seemed to cast long, eerie shadows in the dim light. The group split up, each heading to different parts of the museum to conduct their investigations. Chris, drawn by a strange sense of curiosity, made his way to the storage room. The door creaked open, revealing a dark, dusty room filled with shelves of strange and forgotten artifacts. The horror ambient grew more oppressive as he entered, the air heavy with the scent of decay and old wood. As he explored the room, he felt a growing sense of unease. The artifacts seemed to watch him, their glass eyes glinting in the darkness. He heard a faint rustling sound, like something moving in the shadows, but when he turned to look, there was nothing there. The room grew colder, and Chris could see his breath in the air. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and Chris felt a cold hand brush against his arm. He jumped, spinning around to find the room empty. but the sense of being watched was overwhelming. The horror ambience intensified as the artifact seemed to come to life. Shadows moved, and the rustling sound grew louder, more insistent. Chris raised his camera, hoping to capture whatever was happening, but the screen flickered and went dark. The room was plunged into darkness, and Chris felt a sudden pressure on his chest, as if something was trying to crush him. He tried to move, but his body was paralyzed, trapped in a state of sleep paralysis as the shadows closed in around him. The next morning, the museum staff found Chris in the storage room, unconscious and unresponsive. The other investigators had heard nothing, seen nothing, and were shocked to find him in such a state. Chris was taken to the hospital, but he never regained consciousness. The storage room was sealed off and the museum continued to operate, but the staff often spoke of strange noises and cold spots in the halls, a lingering reminder of the night when the past refused to stay buried.